I got to tell you, that's one of my favorite songs, uplifting, joyful. But Alex's story about Judd really stops me in my tracks. Doesn't it put all of this in perspective, kind of the work that we're doing? At one point in time, Alex addressed those of you who are newer advisors. And I want to tell you something as well, something that we as more experienced advisors also need to be reminded of. We are in a helping profession. That means we have the privilege of partaking in the most joyful experiences that our clients have throughout life. But we also have the honor of walking them through some of the most tragic and challenging. And you can't opt out of this. We can't opt out of this. However, we can be better trained. We can become technicians of the personal and the human side of the work that we do. And that's why this next session is so perfectly positioned. Alex mentioned how critical our dynamic partnerships are to mutual success. And our title sponsor, Fidelity Investments, is no exception. And it's not only their work as a custodial partner that contributes to the experience our clients have as investors, but also their work in the area of behavioral finance, focusing extensive research on the lens through which our financial decision-making is made, helping uncover new ways for advisors and clients alike to think about how we spend, how we save, and what money means in our life. To discuss this work further, please help me welcome Fidelity's Vice President of Family, Thought Leadership, and Practice, Tobias Donath.
Thank you for having me here today. It's really exciting to join this group. I get to do a lot of this type of speaking, and to see this room, how full it is, some of the energy this morning is a joy to be a part of. And following up on Alex's story and hearing what that person meant to him and kind of the reminder is an interesting segue for the talk that we're going to have today, which is on the vulnerability of wealth. And my goal for today is really to touch on the part that says rethinking the multi-generational advisor-family partnership. So what does that mean, and where are we going to go? I'm going to start with a story and to help you understand a little bit of maybe why I'm here in front of you talking today. And that is that 15 years ago today, I wasn't even in the financial services industry or space. 15 years ago today, I was baking bread in a small bakery in Toronto, Canada. And I guess not so small, we processed 40 tons of flour a day. And that business was started by my mom. And my brother and I worked in that family business. And a few years ago, we sold that business. And the reason I share this story is that not only do I get the privilege of working in this industry day in and day out and with families of wealth and helping them think about what it means to be wealthy and how to engage around it, but my family has that perilous privilege of now being a family of wealth. So what is a perilous privilege? I remember when I got married, the person a friend who spoke at my wedding said, you know, you have the perilous privilege of being married. I remember thinking, my wife looked at me and said, don't ever ask him to speak at anything again. And I remember years later, he gave us the speech, and my wife and I kind of sat down and we said, this is a perilous privilege. We have the privilege of being together, and we got to work at it. And there's a lot of challenges that come with it. For all of you who are married in the room know that. And being wealthy, this is going to sound funny, but being wealthy is a perilous privilege. We have the opportunity to do things we couldn't imagine. My family had the opportunity to engage and work together, and we have a burden. We have a burden that comes with expectation of what we're going to do and how we're going to engage with each other, and a burden of the stewardship of wealth and how to use it. And this was new to us. And so the title of this talk is The Vulnerability of Wealth, because that's what we believe it is. We believe that wealth has a tremendous vulnerability. And it's a hard thing to say in today's society when people will look at you and say, how can you call being wealthy vulnerable? And so we're going to unpack that a little bit. Again, I'm going to stay with my story for a minute. So a few years ago, my mom decided when she sold the business that she was going to liquidate and help my brother and I out. The vulnerable part of this story for me, especially in a room this size, is to share that story. I am that next generation of clients that many of you have. When my mom decided to give me $5 million, that changed my life and my family's life. So where's the vulnerability in that, right? What's interesting is you have people who will talk to you about this and they'll say, well, that's great. You're lucky. Don't spend it all in one place. It's kind of the one end of the continuum. On the other end of the continuum, I can tell you, you see people who look at you and they'll say, he's not even 40 and has more money than I'll ever have. And they judge you. It's quite an isolating experience. And so the question starts to become, what are the feelings that people have around being wealthy? What's interesting is no one's ever asked me that. How do you feel about being wealthy? If I told you that my brother didn't get a dime of that wealth, that he, like me, is raising a few kids, similar ages, trying to figure life out, you can feel the challenge of the fairness and equality in that kind of a story. If I told you that when my mom gave me that money, she had a lawyer call me and say, hey, we got to figure out how to protect that money from your wife, the mother of my 3 children, my college sweetheart. That's an interesting conversation. All of you are advisors here. Whenever we hear stories like that, I always want to ask people, hey, do you want to come to my kitchen dining room table? You tell my wife how we're going to do this, and let's see how that conversation goes. The vulnerability of wealth is a real thing that all of you are experiencing with your clients. And my goal for today's talk is for us to rethink what it means to be an advisor, a multi-generational advisor. I thought Alex did a great job early on talking about all these statistics that we have, right? And we're going to talk some more about those in a minute. But money is moving, and being multi-generational is going to be a requirement. And so today, my goal is to provoke your thinking a little bit and to inspire some new action around what it means to be an advisor and how we engage. A lot of the content you're going to hear today is out of bigger programs that we at Fidelity put on around engaging advisors on becoming more multi-generational, more relationship-focused in a family sense. And so I'm going to do my best to give you a whole bunch of nuggets, and I hope some of them are valuable. And I'd love to talk to you afterwards if that's of interest. So what does it mean to have a multi-generational advisor partnership? It means that we want to change the trajectory of families. You take my family for a minute. Some of those things happened. All of them did. But I had advisors in my corner that helped me understand that I need to talk to my brother and not keep it a secret from him, but actually tell him, this is what I got. I know you didn't get any, but let's figure out how you and I do this together. It means telling my mom that my wife not being included in the process is a no-go for me. I'm out. You can keep the money. I had advisors who helped me make those decisions, and that's what I hope many of you will think about. And at Fidelity, we call the value that we as advisors bring you the advice value stack. And moving up out of managing the money and achieving the goals means how do we get into the emotional realm of peace of mind, ultimately to fulfillment, and then we'd like to add the mindset of family harmony, because we are in the business of helping families stay together through time. That's their wish when they engaged with building the wealth. Nobody set out to say, how can I screw up my family at the end of this hard work, right? So what does it mean to move up the value stack? One of the challenges I have in this industry is that we talk a lot about what needs to be done. We need to have more spouses in meetings. We need to do X and Y, but we don't necessarily talk about how we do that. And so today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the mindset and the skill set for moving up that value stack. Because it was built based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it basically says, as you move up, do your clients associate the transactions they're doing with you higher on the value stack? Or is somebody else getting to have that conversation? If you take a simple 529 and we just run it and do it and help them think about it, or are we getting to, what does this mean to you? How do you feel about it? What's the significance of it? Those are two different types of conversations. To me, college planning can be functional, and we can be at the multi-generational family harmony level. So again, mindset, skill set. By the end of this presentation, hopefully you'll have a few of each of those. So let's take a step back. What does it mean when we say the vulnerability of wealth? What does it mean to be wealthy? We do not take a dollar and cents approach to that. We say that when you have more than you need and you have to think about what to do with it, you're wealthy. At the heart of that definition is choice. You have the choice of what you're going to do with it. And that's where that vulnerability comes in. And so we started to say to ourselves, what are the tranches of wealthy? On the left end of that, you have the lifestyle wealthy, the folks who can kind of make the decisions and they get to live a little bit better of a life, but they don't know that they'll have a lot left over. As you start to move to the right, you have the retirement wealthy. I have everything I need to live the lifestyle in perpetuity, and I might have a little bit left over. And I'll deal with that at that day of reckoning. As we start to move right, you see and can feel how this vulnerability continues. When you are generationally wealthy, you are leaving behind something that will truly impact the family into the future. And obviously, as you go beyond, you can see how much more impact you'll have. Here's the catch. On any of these, and I thought it was funny when Alex said, my kids are eyeballing me. They're waiting for me to move on. I don't know Alex. I don't know where he fits on here. But whether you have a BMW and they're wondering, is that my car? And when do I get to use it? And what does that look like? Or you have a private jet and you're asking the same questions. Dollars and cents are just extra zeros on the end. We have the same complexities. I was with a family the other day, had just over $100 million, and the argument was over mom's jewelry. Dollars and cents at the end of the day is not what's at play here. And so when you think about your clients, what I'm hoping you see with this slide is that it's not a matter of how you cut them by dollars. It's how you cut them around how they're engaging their family in the decision making, in those choices that they're making with each other. So again, why does this matter? We know that there's vulnerability here. We also know that families and advisors are struggling with how to deal with that vulnerability. I love the very first article here. When you go to our friend Google and you start to look around and you see why wealthy clients are using financial advisors for money therapy. That article is about what it means to pick 3 to 5 client families and work with them deeply. Or when you look at the next one, are your clients' kids freezing you out? How many of you here are worried that when the money does move, am I still the advisor? We're going to talk about that today. And lastly, we've got the wealth transfer risk. You saw the numbers of how much is in motion. We know that to be true whether you look at 60 trillion, 80 trillion, 40 trillion, a lot of zeros are moving over the next 20 to 25 years. So what does that mean for you as a firm, as a group? Here's the challenge that I see. If you take all of this data and you add it up, you see that baby boomers are aging, that money is moving, and you look backwards and you say, gosh, in the only real study that exists out there, we are not good at transferring money. If you just take the old adage of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, we know we don't do the backward stuff well. We don't pass things on well. What's amazing, in 2012, somebody at Boston College did a study. And they basically found that the number one concern, families of wealth, there's about 160 or 70 families with 25 million or more. Number one concern, have I been a good parent? Right? So we're worried about our future giving. We know we don't do it well in the past. And again, we know that wealth is creating a common experience that isn't getting us to what we actually wanted. And that part's always remarkable to me. We're doing something called a narrative project. We talk to families about their wealth experiences. And when we start to qualitatively pull out all the words we're hearing, the words we're hearing are not what you would associate with families who have worked really hard to create opportunity and benefit for their families. We're hearing words like fear, intimidation. The one that's not here that I'm hearing the most right now is isolation. I have nowhere to turn. Wealth is creating this new phenomenon around what do I do with it, and it's at scale. I mean, those numbers were crazy. There was 15 million millionaires, right? There are a lot of people who are going to impact their future families in significant ways, and they don't know how to do it. So now let's go to the other word in the vulnerability of wealth, vulnerability. What is vulnerability? It's a human condition. So what do we mean by that? Can you love another human being without being vulnerable? No. And we mean no because they can leave you, they judge you, they can hurt you. We're inherently in vulnerable places all the time. And Brené Brown, how many people have heard of Brené Brown? If you haven't, if you're a parent, highly encouraged, changed my life. I have 3 kids, 9, 7, and 11. Did that a little backwards. And that's the order I prefer them in. Either that or that's the order of the one who gives me the most trouble. But vulnerability is the emotion we experience during times of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. What a great definition for what vulnerability is. She takes that one step further, and she helps us see that vulnerability is actually about the courage you have to show up when you don't know the answer, when you don't know if you're going to win. If we just let that sink in for a minute. Again, come back to the title, The Vulnerability of Wealth. The emotional exposure, uncertainty, and risk that parents, patriarchs, and matriarchs have about how they're going to engage their children is at the heart of what it means to be an advisor, and is something that I hope all of you today will think a little bit differently about, and maybe even act a little bit differently around going forward. A couple things I'll share with you. One, she wrote this brilliant book called The Gifts of Imperfect Parenting. It's a 2-hour Audible book. You can't get it because it's a speech she gave. But it's absolutely brilliant because she helps us understand that we weren't conditioned to get vulnerability. And so when I think about that in the money, wealth, and estate planning space, I go to a story that always sticks with me. So I'm going to ask you all to kind of go on a journey with me here for a minute, maybe close your eyes. And imagine you're 9, 10, 11 years old, you're sitting in your family's home, and your mom and your dad, you're maybe watching TV, and your mom and your dad are figuring out some finances, trying to decide if they're going to buy something or not. And you hear the voices rise. And you know what's going to happen. They're going to argue about this, right? But what you suddenly hear is you hear mom say to dad, you know, I'm really sorry I raised my voice. I haven't explored your feelings on this subject yet. Could you take a minute and tell me how you feel? And dad shares openly his heart on how he feels. And then he turns to his wife and says, oh my goodness, I've spoken so much. I haven't explored your feelings yet. Can you tell me how you're feeling? Yeah, right. So we know we didn't grow up that way. And if we didn't grow up that way, how are we supposed to engage the vulnerability of wealth if we haven't been modeled for us? So we're actually all stepping into a new space. We're stepping into a space that we haven't fully understood ourselves, because in no time, again, I heard somebody say earlier today, these are the good old times. We are in a space where major things are changing, and we don't have any tools for how to engage with them. And I think what Brené Brown gives us is a wonderful frame for how to think about the vulnerability. So, how does that relate to financial services? Because we don't know how to engage, what do? And here's where I always get myself in trouble in talks like this. I wonder how complicit all of us are in helping to create this list of words behind us. Rather than engaging in the vulnerability, We jump into silence, control, expert mode, rational decisions. We all know what this feels like. So let me tell you a story. Again, I do a lot of work with advisors and with end families, and an advisor in one of our programs called me up and he said, hey, I just had this experience with a couple, and I don't know what happened. Can you help me work this case? I said, sure, what happened? He said, a couple walked in about 3 months ago and said, we want to help our son and our daughter-in-law. They're about to have their third child, and their house isn't big enough, and he chose to be a teacher, so he's never going to earn what we earned. This couple had maybe $7-8 million in assets, and they said, we want to help in a way that we can. Great. The advisor asked 3 questions. Maybe you recognize them. Let's figure out how much you can afford, what accounts to take it from, and what time of year to give it. It was towards the end of the year, and they were trying to decide this year or next year. They worked out their math. They had little conversations like, you know, if it was $300,000 or $400,000, what would that buy? Where would they live? What would they do? Great, we got it all settled. Proud as can be, they left the office, advisor and family, and the family went home and told their son on their own, hey, we're going to give you $400,000 to help you out and figure out your life. Buy a bigger house, help your family. Advisor went home, got in bed with his wife. We know what happens when they get in bed together, right? They talk about their parents. And he said, Mom and Dad are going to give me and you $400,000 to change our situation, our living situation. And the wife and the husband talked, and they said, you know, we love the friends and the neighborhood and the kids that are growing up with our kids. I don't know how to reconcile money for a new house and the wish here, why don't we just renovate our house? And so they started making plans. They hired an architect. What do you think happened when the son asked Dad for the $400,000? Said no. Why? Because this money was for a new house. I'm not burying $400,000 into a renovation project, into a house that will never yield the money back. It's a poor use of the assets. So when the advisor called me, it was right after the holidays when Mom and Dad, who had been in his office, said, we didn't get to see the grandkids over the holidays. What's tough about this story is, as dramatized as it is, this happens all the time. Big sums of money, small sums of money, right? And the challenge isn't all those words you saw before, just silence. It's actually the biggest kind of defense to the vulnerability of wealth is the parent-child hierarchy. What does that mean? At the end of the day, Mom and Dad said, we're Mom and Dad, we've got great life experiences, buy a new house. Buy it in a safer neighborhood. If you want our money, here's what you get access to. The problem with the parent-child hierarchy is that our industry is where it lives the longest. If you think about how long you can parent your children in most other realms, it goes with time where you don't have that choice anymore. But in money, wealth, and estate planning, we might find a prenup, keep it in the bloodline, make sure that, you know, the in-laws don't get it. We might talk a lot about the trusts, how you use it, what the directives are. I was with a family the other day who discovered he was so strict about wanting to make sure his money went to the right place that he set up a trust for education that his uber-smart granddaughter couldn't access because one of the requirements was you had to do 4 years of high school. She did it in 3. Just think about what we don't get into when we get stuck in, I know best, I'm going to do it right. And so here's the question that I have for all of you. It's interesting, when you reflect on this and we laugh and we talk about where we are as an industry, what are we actually learning? The question I have, and this was a gentleman named Edwards Deming who said this quote, he said, every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. Is the financial services industry set up to get the results we are getting? And if so, what are we going to do about it? Because then it's a systemic problem. It becomes a question of what's our role as advisors in that process? And I'm going to get a little provocative here. I'm going to ask all of you, What's our role getting stuck in the co-parenting trap? What's the co-parenting trap? It's when I put my arm around my client and say, let's figure this out together. I got you. It's when we come alongside our parents and we keep that parent-child hierarchy, parent-child, in line. What does that sound like? Hey, your parents love you very much. They're doing what's best for you. Hey, let's give them let's give them this gift and we'll test whether they do things right. Let's not tell your children about anything. We can wait until you're dead. They can read it at the will. Right? Some of these sound, again, quite ridiculous, but there are a continuum of these types of options that we are talking about every day that I would want us to think about. And I'd like us to think a little bit more about what choice we have for what we can do differently going into the future. And this is kind of the mindset frame that I have for all of us, which is that we have a choice to go after peership. What if all of us in this room said that our primary job to move up that value stack is to try to help our clients and their families as a whole find peership? Peership, new word. Before we get into the definition, let's go back to that example. What if the first three questions we didn't ask were, how much can you afford, from what account should we take it, and when do we give it? What if the first questions we asked were, how have you talked to your children about this? What is their wish for how to use the money? What is your thinking about the gifting to your son, daughter, and their family? What are you setting up with this gift? What if we are the people that help our clients get out of the isolation that comes with the vulnerability of wealth? The amount of clients I talk to on a regular basis who tell me, I have no one to talk to, and frankly, even talking to my spouse about this is hard. You all are best positioned to sit there and say, let me be your partner, your thought partner in this. And let's think a little bit differently about the types of questions we want to ask ourselves. And once you take that $400,000 cat out of the bag, it's hard to put back in. But these questions can be asked to explore. Imagine if that conversation had gone, hey, listen, I can do all the math for you. I'm going to figure this out. I'll tell you how much you can afford, when to give it, what accounts to take it from. Why don't you go home, have a conversation. When you get back, we'll talk about the numbers. What if we took a process that was just a little bit different? So what is peership? Peership is being in relationship with a sense of mutual love, respect, voice, opinions, feedback, and understanding. We know what it feels like to be peers. I remember when I bought a snowblower, I knew I had to pick up the phone and call my father-in-law. And I knew when I got on the phone, he would tell me, are you stupid? The only snowblower you're going to buy is this one. That's peership. I mean, that's not being in a peer mode, right? When I pick up the phone and I call a friend, what does he ask me? What are you snowblowing? Sounds like a dumb question, but if you're Canadian, like I am, you might have a rink in your backyard. If you're snowblowing a rink, you need a very different snowblower depending on how big that rink is, right? We had a dialogue about how he made a decision, what kind of engine strength to buy, what type of snowblower, how wide, etc. With my father-in-law, there was only one store in the world to buy it from, one brand, and one size. We know what it feels like to be peers. And we have to understand that peership exists outside of the hierarchy that is natural in the systems that we are in. And why do I know this is true? Show me the management book that says, don't ever ask an employee for their voice, their opinion, their views. Just tell them what to do and expect them to follow through. None of you would have a team if you walked through that process. So we know that peership matters. So if we all get stuck in the parent-child hierarchy, what's the driver of that? So let me ask you a reflective question. Who here in the room likes to be parented? Just raise your hand. Oh, there we go. I always have one taker, which means somebody has really good cooking or has a really warm and comfortable home. And that's so true. We want to stay parents. I want to continue to be the parents of my 3 children forever. And I have to recognize that at some point I have to give up control. Who here likes to be parented by their in-laws? Who here liked it when their in-law explained how to raise a proper child? And now think of how many of our clients are doing that with their families. And they're using the tools of money, wealth, and estate planning to do it. So what does peership sound like? I gave you some examples. Let's talk about a couple places where you can practice it because it is a skill. I was with our therapist partner, and we were on stage, and he looked at me, and this was early on, and I was still learning the process, and he said, Tobias, how old are your children? At the time, my oldest was 5. And he said, Tobias, how have you practiced peership with your son? I said, excuse me, he's 5. And I think I'm smart enough, but he asked me again, and I again answered the same way, and I didn't see the trap that was coming. And he asked me, does a 5-year-old have a voice? Does he have an opinion? Does he have a wish? I said, yes. He said, so how do you practice peership? You sit down with him over lunch, and you ask him, how are you doing as a dad? Have you ever asked a 5-year-old how you're doing as a dad? This is what's vulnerable about peership. Because when I asked him, and he said, Dad, I love that you play hockey with me. I love that you helped me build a rink, and blah, blah, blah. And then I said, Aiden, help me understand what I could do a little better. He said, Dad, when you raise your voice, I get really scared. It's that crushing piece of feedback where you go, what am I going to do about this? Complete emotional exposure with a 5-year-old who can articulate to his father, this is what I don't like. So peership is about asking questions that get you answers that help you make better decisions because you're allowing their voice to come into play. If you really want a challenge, or your children are too old and you're worried about asking them, ask your spouse, how am I doing as a husband? How am I doing as a wife? We talk a lot about how when we don't do those conversations, think about how many of your employees you have to have one-to-ones with, and you have to check in every year and give them feedback. And yet we let this drift in our families happen because we never ask. So let's step out of peership in the family and let's move to peership in financial services. I get this question all the time. How much should I give my college-age child for spending money? If we practice peership, what's the answer? You ask them. How much money do you want? How much money do you need? Why should that not scare us? How many children do you honestly know that would look at you and say, I'm going to buy a little bit of pot. I'm going to need a keg every other week. I probably need to buy some books. I might eat pizza when I forget to go to the dining hall. If we actually get things into dialogue, then we can be in places of influence. Influence is synonymous with peership. Can we help our clients get into dialogue with their families so that they're in an influential place and not in a control parenting place? That's the wish. So what makes that hard? It's hard because what we think will happen is when they give us their answers, that we have to go with it. The hard part about this, and psychologically this is really interesting, is voice gives you power, control takes it away. But we think silence lets us step out of it. And silence is actually part of what creates distance in families. So we have to get their views, even if we have to have the hard conversation that says, I disagree with you, and we're not going to make that decision. This idea that we co-create solutions, that is the epitome of what I would absolutely love for this industry to be talking about. That we co-created our wealth plans with our families. That we got the voices we needed. That we understood the difference between voice and vote. So, my goal today, to give you 2 things. a mindset, and a skill set. The next few slides are just going to kind of wrap up what we talked about. The first is the mindset, thinking and acting systemically. The first question that I would encourage you all to think about is, what is your mental model about being an advisor? Mental models are the constructs we build in our heads. A gentleman named Peter Senge came up with this term. And he said, for us to think more systemically, we actually have to start with our mental model. What is our mental model of what our role is, what our job is, how we are viewed? If I can think about that, I can recognize how that mental model is both useful and limiting. I'll give you an example. Since somebody had the audacity to talk about the St. Louis Blues and the Bruins, I'll talk a little bit about the Patriots. Who here knows Tom Brady? When Tom Brady won one of the Super Bowls, he went on the field, and there was an expectation that his mother wasn't going to be there with him. She was battling a pretty tough form of cancer, and they thought she wasn't going to make it to the game or really through life, and she's still here today. When he got on the field, she embraced him and she kissed him. Anybody know where she kissed him? I think I heard it. On the lips. In Tom Brady's family, affection is shown with lip kissing. Wife, children, son, Bob Kraft. So when we take that frame for a minute, people in this room right now are sitting here and you're thinking one of two things. That is absolutely gross. That's how I grew up. Makes sense. Mental models are really useful because you know what to do based on all the experiences you've had. So in the Tom Brady case, take it to my family. I married a girl. We had 3 kids. She kisses on the lips. I don't. Bit of a conundrum. What do you do? Mental model is your ability to say, is that a useful view that I have of the world? And how can I relax it a little bit? How can I see that other views are maybe not wrong, they're just other views? My wife's mental model was the same as the Tom Brady family. It was different from mine. This is relevant because what is your mental model about being an advisor? And how does being an advisor impact your behavior? How does it impact your choices? So when we think about being systemic, we talk about what is your role? Who are you engaged with? How do you engage them? How do you speak with them? Thinking and acting more systemically will allow you to think about the family quite differently. Second part is the skill set of facilitating peership. The continuum I would like to leave you all with is this idea that parenting is on the control side and peership is on the influence side. And if you think really hard about your own families, you cannot be in relationship if you stay parenting. You can only stay in relationship with family members when you're in the influence sphere. And we all know what that feels like. So how do you help your clients recognize that this continuum exists, and how do you help them move along that continuum? From a peership point of view, there are kind of 3 skills that we would ask you to think about. Skill number 1 is empowering voice. 2 is exploring perspectives, and 3 is providing a continuum of options. So what is the language that gets associated with that? On empowering voice, go back to your families that you work with and have a conversation about whose voice do we have in the system right now? And what does it sound like to get more voice? And how do we distinguish between voice and vote? Right? Vote meaning the decision making, and voice being just hearing that influential language come into play. 2, exploring perspectives. What are the peership-based questions you can ask? Questions that usually cause somebody to step into somebody else's point of view. What might their perspective be? How have you talked to them about it? What is important to them? How do you get them to start thinking as that next generation? And then 3, continuum thinking. And this is a tough one, but when you get it, it is so useful with families. I was sitting with a family where the father said, kids should not be raised in the city. I refuse to give my daughter any money to buy a house in the city. The daughter has 0 space when there's only one answer, when there's no continuum. When he holds an opinion that strongly, she only has one choice: run, fight, or shame herself. Psychologically, 3 choices. And so if you think about that, how can you help your clients see that there are other options? Is every child that was born in the city and raised in the city, did they become terrible human beings? Can we explore what might be so important to your daughter about that? Can we maybe not think that that's a slight to you? So 3 skills and a closing frame. I know we're just running up to a break here. And a closing frame, which is change the trajectory. Our view is, imagine if you could take some of the conversations you have and just see them differently. What if you're having conversations about whose money is it? Because that's a confusing thing for children. If you lived a certain lifestyle and now they can't afford it. Or if you ask them, or you help them explore, can they live the same lifestyle as you, and what would that look like? Can you talk today about gifting today or gifting someday? What's the difference? How can families help families in today? Social contracts. Great example. What do I pay? That might be my Get Off the Stage award. Gift today or gift someday? The question here that's really interesting is, how are you going to use your money, wealth, and estate planning in your family? We talk a lot about social contracts. If you have younger clients, think about, what do I pay for and until when? And if you have multiple children, how do we all align around what that social contract is? Car insurance, car payments, cell phones, down payment for a first house, wedding. There are a lot of things that if we didn't allow them to go into the reactive mode of everyday life and we proactively talked about them, our clients would have very different dialogue. So my wish today is that all of you maybe are a little bit provoked to think differently and hopefully act differently as you engage with your families when you leave here in a couple of days. Thank you very much for today.